All right, so for this activity, what we have is a couple different options to do roughly the same thing. We're trying to get the kids, again, to apply what they're learning about force and motion. In this case, we're using what's called a Hall's carriage. I don't know why they call it Hall's carriage, but they're kind of nice. They're smooth rolling aluminum machine part wheels with a small space inside. So these are really good for doing a variety of things. So one, they roll very smoothly. They have a hole on either end, so you can attach a paper clip, for instance, or a small hook. You can attach a string to it, so you can add weights to it or add weights to a string, and then this will be pulled over by the mass of the weight you attach to the string. You can also put weights directly into it, mass pieces, and use a ramp or a straight surface to get the kids to kind of experiment with that. So there's a variety of things you can do with these, and they're pretty tough. They don't fall apart. They're actually bolted through the axle, so they're not just going to pop out on you, which is good because we're going to crash them today, and that's the point. So we're going to apply this with how force works, and then how we can save the people inside the car from the forces that are happening on the outside of the car. Now, this is one video. I'm going to show the whole thing. It's only about a minute long, parts of it though. This is from the National Safety Transportation Board, and it's all right. Sorry about that. And some sound issues.
Many car makes and models go through the same ANCAP safety tests, so you can compare which cars have the best safety performance. The more stars, the better the cars. Righty-ho, let's show them how it's done. You first, Greg. The side impact test.
So I guess you can warn your students before the explicit nature of the egg destruction happens.
Well, although Greg got scrambled,
it's actually a pretty short video, but we'll cut it short a little bit more. But it's from the National Safety Board, and it shows basically how they're doing some of these tests with, of course, egg cartons and eggs. We're going to be using eggs as well, so it's a good connection. One of the things they'll notice is that the eggs get squished a lot, they get broken a lot, and it's because the force is being transmitted from the car to the egg. We've got a couple other videos that will show you pieces of it real quick, and you can look at later and show your classes later. When you have your kids build this, first of all, use raw eggs. It's way more fun than hard-boiled eggs. And then you always put them in a Ziploc bag so that you can contain the destruction. And so you don't have to worry too much about raw egg yolk going all over the place. Now, some of your kids are going to immediately go, oh, this is cool, and they'll try to blow air into the bag. It's kind of a mini airbag system. And basically, we want to tell them, no, that's not allowed. So we have our egg. We put it into our car. What you would then do is have the kids launch the car into a surface. Now, it could be a piece of wood. It could be a couple bricks stacked up. It doesn't have to be a terribly hard surface because you don't want to damage the cars. You could build a ramp out of cardboard. There's a variety of different things you could be doing. In any case, you want the average car with no protection to be going fast enough that when it hits that surface and it stops, what's going to happen is the egg will crack. So we'll grab that board for you, please. We'll use a board here and we'll demonstrate that real quick. That right there. Thanks, Stacey. So we'll have the car run into it. Face shields, always safety. And so they'll just take it and then roll it into it. Now, in this case, it didn't seem like a lot of impact, but the egg is cracked clearly, and they'll be able to see it. So, person died. That's it. Sorry, guys. So our job is to make sure that that doesn't happen. And then you give them back the cart, and you give them materials, straws, rubber bands, those work really well. Tape can work depending on how they use it. Those are some of the basic tools you can use to do this. Please don't do something like bubble wrap, because bubble wrap is so effective that they can do something very simple and not very thoughtful and still have the egg survive. So I made a little cushioned area inside of this by cutting some straws and taping them on the inside of the container for the egg. So what you want to have happen is that the egg is sitting in this container and not being impacted by the forces. There's some give in this, okay? I used to have a 1965 Pontiac Le Mans, which was a beautiful car, but it was a death trap because the dash was steel, the steering wheel was steel, everything was steel inside. And our joke was if we ever had an accident, the fire department would come, they'd hose out the inside of the car. We'd all be dead. They'd hose out the inside of the car, and it would be in pristine condition, and they could sell it because, all of that force gets transmitted to us. Nowadays, of course, when you hit a curb in your car, the whole front end of your car collapses. And you're like, this is ridiculous. I mean, if you look at the bumper, for instance, in your car, you'll find it's full of styrofoam, literal styrofoam. And they're there because they're designing the car to be expendable. You, not expendable, car, definitely expendable. So while it's annoying to go through your insurance company for a very small accident, you're saving yourself from the trauma of that action. So we have our little egg person here, and of course your kids can decorate their egg, name it, whatever they want to do. They can use rubber bands. Rubber bands work well as seatbelts because, like a real seatbelt, they flex. The kids can use tape, for instance, but what will happen is the tape does not flex. So what they'll find out is they'll tape their egg securely. They'll have the accident, and often they'll crack right along where that tape is. It's like having a steel seatbelt, and that would be a horrible thing for you and everyone else in the car. So rubber bands give a little give. So for instance, this is pretty well secured. Let me show my bag doesn't hit, so I want to make sure it's hitting on the front. Okay, so fairly good impact. Egg has no damage to it. And of course, you can be as strict or as casual about this as you want. If your kids are really good at design processes, you can then charge them for the materials they're using and be more specific. So if you want to use this a particularly effective tool or material, you need to then be charged more heavily for that. And so you can have an entire economy going on about it, and then have the kids estimate the cost of the car along with that. So the Hall's carriage does a good job with that. Very similar thing, put that back, thank you so much, is you can do the same kind of concept with paper plates. For instance, this is what's called a Mars or lunar lander. And so the idea would be that you would have an egg up on top, and it needs to fall and fall flat and still support the egg. So if it falls and then falls sideways, for instance, it won't work, or if it tips upside down, then that's a failure point. Now this is falling flat. In part, you can hear this because there's a steel washer on the bottom of this, adding a little bit of weight, changing the center of gravity, making sure that it falls flat. Now even if I drop this from 20 feet, it's going to fall straight down. Now what I've done is I've put paper plates in here, but I put them like a clamshell, like top to top, so that as they take the force, they will absorb that force in and out. I've also put taken some paper plate, cut it, and accordion folded it so that it's going to have some give top to bottom as well. And then I put some straws on top, again, all of which to help support that egg as it falls. We drop things like this from 20 feet or so on the concrete, and the egg is still easily survived. Some kids like to add a parachute mechanism up on top. They like to do all kinds of things. Give them as much flexibility as you have the time to permit, because that's where they're going to get the learning. If you do this and you invest the time with an activity like this, a design activity like this, please invest the time after the activity to have your kids write, talk, and work with the answers for this. What did they do? Why did it work? What is the best practices for the entire group when they come together? This part was good here. This part, another one, is better in this other way. So that you can come back to it later. But so they understand the process is not just one time did that work. It's I try it, I fix it, I try it again, I fix it, I try it again. And so they can understand too that all of these processes are work on it, build it, share what you found out with other people, come back to it, try it again, learn from others as well. The last one will be an example of this. Use 2-liter soda bottles. 2-liter soda bottles are pretty handy because you can cut a hole into them Now, to cut a hole into them, you have to use something that is not, you can't use the kid scissors. You've got to use more adult scissors. But if you cut it in half, you can cut it in half for the kids if you want. Have a parent do it if you will. Then you suddenly have a vehicle that you can then change the dimensions on. Okay, so you can shorten it. But more importantly, you can poke more holes in it. And those holes can be filled with straw, like a piece of straw. They can be filled with string, they can be filled with rubber bands. And they would suspend the egg inside, floating in the middle. Now, some people like to put it right on the bottom, some people put it right on the top. That will be a failure point because the force is being transmitted through the container. You want them to suspend it in the middle, kind of like in a web, and then you can throw this around quite a distance. We've done it 30, 40 feet. Even just throwing it like a football onto concrete, and if they built it well, they've done a good job. These are also nice because they're very disposable. They're easy for the kids to cut. So if the kids want to cut it into a couple sections, you know, if they want to take a piece out, if they want to then cut the pieces. I've had people take a piece off of this and then use this as a small container, put the egg inside this container, suspend this inside. So they can be very creative with it, and the materials obviously no cost for you. It allows them some flexibility without having for you to rebuild everything or having to use 1,000 different things like this, for instance. Now, to give you an idea of how this works, let's take a look at a school bus real quick. And this is a school bus crash. And the kids immediately notice there's no seatbelts in the school bus, and this is true. But the kids will get a better perspective of what kind of forces are involved. Now, here's something to point out to the kids. The front end of this bus is now crushed. Every window along here is now broken, which means the force was absorbed by the front of the bus. And the way that's happening is this entire bus is designed to lift off its frame and move back. In fact, the whole bus, the top part of the bus, is sliding on a rail. And because it's sliding on a rail, you can see here, here's the front wheel. The front wheel used to be up here. It is now back here. The whole bus has come up and slid forward, absorbing all of that force. So now the people inside the bus, while they're bouncing around quite a bit, are all going to survive. On the other hand, we've got what happens when you do, this is at 120 miles an hour. Now 120 miles an hour sounds ridiculous, but if I have two cars on the South Carolina side road, they hit each other going about 50, 60 miles each. There you go, you're doing 120 miles collectively. And this is what happens to a forward focus on speed.
This is it. The car decelerates from 120 miles an hour to 0 in 68 milliseconds, with its occupants experiencing peaks of 400 G.
Now usually about 9 G is death. So they didn't even use the expensive crash test dummies on that because they cost several $100,000 each, and there is no way you're going to get usable data for something like that. So you're talking about forces of motion. You can try to absorb some of these forces, but if people don't follow the speed limits and aren't careful, you can go far, far beyond that. So that's ways of getting the kids to think about how can we absorb forces instead of having them transmitted, and thinking about ways that forces are propagated or move through materials and whatnot. And just getting them, again, trying to use the design method to solve a particular problem, in this case a very real problem with almost any vehicle. Thank you.